Thank you for coming out. I love women's soccer, and hopefully in under a half hour I can make all of you love women's soccer too, if you don't love it already. Let's get to that. There we are, my first slide. That's me in front of my Zen rock garden. And you can send me a friend request at Facebook, Dave Brett. If you're here and you're in the audience tonight, you're my friend, so send me a friend request. Okay. I want to talk about I'm going to talk about the origins of the sport of soccer, and I'm also going to show you highlights of the U.S. women's national team at each of the past 7 Women's World Cups. The current Women's World Cup just started 5 days ago. You may have seen the USA beat Thailand 13-0 yesterday. They've been criticized for running up the score, but don't worry, that criticism will go away very quickly. Let's see. Okay. But before I talk about the origins of soccer, I just want to say a few reasons why I love women's soccer. The first reason is that women play the exact same game as men. Now compare that or contrast that to the most popular sports in America, American football, baseball, and basketball. Women hardly play American football at all. There's very little participation there. When it comes to baseball, women play softball, not baseball, which is a different game. Women's basketball is close to men's basketball, but there's a significant difference. There's dunking in men's basketball. There's no dunking in women's basketball. So that makes it a different game. The beauty of women's soccer, is that they're playing the exact same game that men play, and there's nothing that a man can do on a soccer field that a woman can't do. Another reason I love the U.S. women's national team is that it's filled with really great people. The players on the team are such good people. If you watch interviews with the players, and if you see any of the video features of them online, you'll see that they're real down-to-earth, nice people. They're the kind of people you'd want to be friends with. And then when you watch the games, so you can identify with them better for that reason. They're not aloof, spoiled athletes. And at a time, when our certain political figures are embarrassing America on the international stage, our women's soccer team is doing the exact opposite. They are nothing but impressive. And so now let me talk about the origins of the sport of soccer. The labor rights movement in the 19th century in England got factory workers, half-day Saturdays. And that's what led to the development of organized sports. People would get out of a factory and go and play games. Interestingly enough, a social justice movement led to the development of the game of soccer, and then a century later, the women's rights movement led to the mass participation of women in that sport. So social justice movements had a lot to do both with creating the game and with giving women access to it. In 1863, a group of people got together in London and created what they called the Football Association. And the term football is a generic term which dates all the way back to the 13th century. Football, it has nothing to do with kicking a ball. Football has to do with a sport played on your feet, as opposed to a sport played on horseback. So that's the reason why there are more than a half a dozen sports called football around the world, because in the 19th century, lots of different sports were created, and they just took the same name. To distinguish football from this kind of football from other kinds of football, is the word association is key. In the years after 1863, people would say, well, let's go play association football. Now, the word association is kind of long, and it's often shortened to ASOC. And in the late 19th century, British schoolboys had a habit of taking the first syllable of a word and adding the letters ER to it to make it their own. But there was a problem with the word association, because if they did that with association, then the sport would be called asser. And even in the late 19th century, British schoolboys had too much decorum to do that. They were too dignified. So they skipped over the first syllable, ass, and took the second syllable, SOC. And that's why we play soccer and not asser. Believe it or not, it's true. Now, the sport is still called football in most of the rest of the world, and the sport has to be called by its alternate name, soccer, in any country where the generic term football was already in use by a different sport. And American football was invented around the same time as association football in the 1860s. So by the time soccer got here, and by the way, you may be wondering, why did soccer not take off in America in the way it did in the rest of the world? And the reason is that plain old-fashioned xenophobia. Soccer was regarded as a foreign sport, and people didn't like the idea of, people wanted to play and watch American sports. But in the late 19th century, British Empire was absolutely crucial to the sport, spread of the sport. At the time, of course, England was the leading economic and colonial power. Of course, after World War II, the British Empire dissolved all of the Britain's former colonies, declared independence. But the sport of soccer has outlived the British Empire. If you think about it, soccer is the most lasting cultural legacy of the British Empire. Now, in 1904, FIFA was established, and FIFA is still around today. Today, they're the wealthiest and most powerful sports organization on the planet, and they are the ones who organize the World Cup. It's technically it's the FIFA World Cup. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, now here, this is from about 1890. Look at what these women had to put up with. That woman on the right is wearing a full-length dress and heels. My God, I mean, women had to face horrible discrimination at that point. I mean, any woman who wanted to play was often scorned and ridiculed by her friends and family. The obstacles to playing at that time were enormous. Let's go to all of that changed in World War I. In World War I in England, men had to go off to work in factories. And so women, for the first time, took their place, and women worked for the first time during World War I. And some of those factories, some of those women in factories formed soccer teams. And in the years immediately following World War I, they would play in English stadiums and did really well. They're not wearing dresses anymore, and if you look closely at that picture in the background, you'll see the stands are filled. They would often get 40 or 50,000 fans. In 1921, the Football Association, which was the organization which had invented the game back in 1863, simply shut down the women's game. They had economic leverage to do so. They had contracts with all of the stadiums in England, and they told the stadiums, we will not book any more men's matches if you book any more female matches. And I mean that kind of move would not withstand modern antitrust laws, but in 1921 in England, they got away with it. You can speculate about the reasons why the Football Association shut down the women's game. One of the main reasons was that women had just earned the right to vote in England, and the Football Association was retaliating for that. And so after 1921, women's soccer in England went underground, and it lasted for 50 years. Believe it or not, that ban on women playing in football stadiums in England was not lifted until 1971, and I'm going to show you highlights of the first international women's match, which was played in 1972 in Scotland. Let's watch that here. Some news, really.
It's England versus Scotland in the first ever Women's Football Association International at Ravenscraig Stadium, Greenwich. And it's a far cry from the days when a lady fainted if a gentleman said damn. England in white shirts playing left to right. Scotland attacked, and it could be first blood for the home team. England clear. Scotland take possession. A goal. And it's a broad day for bonny lassies and brass monkeys. Scotland again. A corner. And it's a goal. Scotland 2, England 0. Half time.
Okay. You notice he said it's a broad day for bonny lassies and brass monkeys. I looked that up. Apparently that's a British expression. Brass monkeys is a British expression which means it's cold outside. That's what that means. So now I noticed I've been telling you about women's soccer in England. Prior to the 1970s, soccer in America was a very minor sport. There was no women's soccer because there was hardly any men's soccer. Soccer has had a presence in the United States for over 100 years, but it never gained any real traction and real popularity until the 1970s. So two things happened in the 1970s which made the current our women's soccer team possible. First, the explosion of popularity of the sport, and second, of course, the women's movement. Let's go. Okay, so here we go. Now, the women's movement in the 1970s They didn't get ERA passed, but they did get something called Title IX, and I assume most of you have heard of Title IX. Title IX, by the way, the United States is the only country in the world which has a law like Title IX. And Title IX was written by an Indiana senator named Birch Bayh, and he, by the way, he passed away back in March. I don't know if you may have seen these obituaries. In the obituaries, he said that Title IX was one of his finest legislative achievements. It was signed into law June 23rd, 1972, which was 6 days after the Watergate break-in. I don't think there was any connection between those two things. The amazing thing about Title IX, let me explain what it does. Title IX, by the way, says nothing about athletics. Title IX is simply a gender equity provision that was tucked into a larger bill about amendments to American education. The full bill included all sorts of provisions about school busing and student loans and government grants. And tucked in there was this gender equity clause. It's about 35 words. It simply says that no one shall be discriminated on the basis of sex at any education institution which is financially supported by the federal government. That includes almost every educational institution, because almost every college has some student who's getting a student loan backed by the U.S. government. The interesting thing about Title IX was that I've done some research I've looked at the news coverage of Title IX's passage in the days following Richard Nixon signed into law. And there's hardly any discussion about that gender equity clause. All of the news coverage is about the other things in the bill. If the gender equity clause was mentioned at all, it was only referenced in terms of how it would affect college admissions, which means that nobody at the time seemed to anticipate the enormous impact that law would have on college sports. The impact it has is that colleges have to spend the same amount of money on male and female sports. Now, in most colleges, there's the football team takes up like 50 or even more scholarships. So to even it out, colleges have to have a scholarship sports at women's team sports. So Title IX is, in fact, has been a boon to women's softball, women's basketball, and women's soccer, because you have to have those sports to balance out all the scholarships you're giving out to football. The Title IX is a controversial law. There are people still today who do not like it because they feel that all the money that's being spent on women's sports is pushing out the less popular men's sports. There have been attempts to amend Title IX. In fact, the senator from Texas, John Tower, in the late 1970s tried to gut it by exempting revenue-producing male sports, and that attempt failed, fortunately. The Title IX essentially guaranteed that there would be financial support for women's soccer and all women's sports. So it turned America's colleges into a factory for producing talented female athletes. Our women's soccer team did not start until 1985. That was the first game our women's national team, and the first Women's World Cup was in 1991. But now, Title IX gives America an enormous advantage in women's sports. But when it comes to soccer, we're at a disadvantage because, in this World Cup, by the way, there are 4 teams that are really almost certainly the winner of this year's World Cup will be one of 4 teams, either the USA, England, Germany, or France. But in England, Germany, and France, soccer has been the number 1 sport for over a century. In America, soccer has been, the 6th or 7th most popular sport, and only since the 1970s. So that puts us at a disadvantage. The quality of coaching in this country is perhaps not as good as it is in those countries, England, Germany, and France. But then we have Title IX, which makes the financing of it possible. The first Women's World Cup was in 1991. Let me go to the next slide. FIFA should have started the Women's World Cup earlier than 1991. The Men's World Cup, by the way, started in 1930. But FIFA was an old boys club. They didn't, and here's a fascinating fact about FIFA. The first woman to attain any type of authority or power in FIFA did not get that authority until 2013. But prior to 6 years ago, there was no woman at all in any position of authority in FIFA. Talk about an old boys club. In 1991, you could almost say that the American public wasn't really ready for the Women's World Cup. The sports media just ignored it. I'm Mr. Soccer, and here's the amazing thing. In 1991, I didn't know the Women's World Cup was taking place. The Women's World Cup in 1991 was in China, and so the games were on an obscure cable channel in the middle of the night. And I don't remember seeing any news coverage of it. Of course, 1991 was before the internet, so you couldn't get your news that way. The FIFA showed how sexist they are by making the games 80 minutes long because they didn't think women could run for 90 minutes. The final between the USA and Norway was tied at 1-1 late in the game, and let's see the highlights of that. Here we go. The USA is in white. Norway is in red.
Looks for Akerstall. Michelle.
Okay, now the sad thing about that championship is that, as I say, hardly anybody in America knew it. The players on that 1991 team tell a story about how when they were flying back to America, they thought that there would be fans and media to meet them at the airport, and they said the only person to meet them at the airport was the bus driver. Well, 8 years later, things changed tremendously. Let's go to 1995. Here's the highlights of the 1995 Women's World Cup. Oh, let me pause and set this up. This is the semifinal of 1995. Norway has taken a 1-0 lead, and we're now late in the game, and the USA is trying to tie it. Okay.
Norway putting the pressure now down the rim. Struck hard. I thought the keeper touched it, apparently not. She couldn't get to it. Lily. Traffic is blocked by Rizzo. Rizzo couldn't keep it alive. USA with it. Venturini. Now to Bobby. Bobby plays it across, and that's blocked. In the air. Akers leaving it. Shot by Venturini was blocked. Still. Johnson. Throws it. Off the cross. Rebound. Crucial out.
So the USA hit the crossbar twice in stoppage time, and Norway won. And then let's watch what happened. Norway rubbed it in by doing this celebration. Watch this. Here. They humiliated the United States by doing the crawl. The USA players have talked about how humiliating it was to watch the Norwegian players doing that. Okay. Let's go to the next. Hold on. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so 1999. So the failure in 1995 set up 1999 as the year the USA could come back and win it on home soil. 1999, I assume many of you remember, if you're old enough to remember, the Women's World Cup in 1999 became a huge hit, and nobody expected how popular it was going to become. It went mainstream. The USA met China in the final. The game was scoreless, and this is an extra time. And I'll show you what happened.
Yeah, the sun is in Spurs' eyes here. And the U.S. definitely is lacking some size and height without Akers in there on defense.
Off the corner from China. Henner. Set to the line. Rebound was clear. The ball was heading for goal.
Okay, so now we're in penalty kicks. And this is the famous moment. The United States has a chance to win it. That's Brandy Chastain.
She missed a penalty kick against China in the Outbound Cup, and they lost that game.
Brandy Chastain is sometimes asked where that sports bra is, and she always just says, I think it's in my hamper. Okay, let's move forward to 2003. 2003, the timing of the 2003 World Cup was very unfortunate. After the 1999 Women's World Cup, the first women's professional soccer league started in the United States. It was called the WUSA. Unfortunately, it went out of business after 3 years, and they went out of business a week before the 2003 World Cup started. So the 2003 World Cup was kind of played under this pall. In the semifinal, the USA met Germany. As you can see up there on the left, Germany has a 1-0 lead going into stoppage time. And this happened.
World Cup thus far, but the USA still came in as a favorite. But everyone knew that Germany could, on their day, beat the United States. But it's still an upset.
You're right, JP. These are the two best teams in the World Cup in 2003.
Prinz, open player. Meiden's going to walk into the box, and Meiden will end it. Maren Meiden with a goal. Germany celebrates. The danger that you two talked about coming back into counterattacks.
Okay. So the USA lost in the semifinal in 2003. Now, going into the 2007 Women's World Cup, the USA had an incredible team. They were on like a 30-match unbeaten streak. Everyone thought they were going to win, including me. And in the semifinal, they came up against Brazil, and Brazil was just a really hot team at that point. Unfortunately, Brazil is not as good as they used to be. But let's see what happened here. Brazil had a 1-0 lead.
Here's Brazil attacking. In the box. Marta. Looking. Shooting low. Marta has scored. Brazil leads by 2. For the first time in 51 games of the Great Lion, the USA trails by more than a goal. Still 100 out there.
Okay, now it's 3-0 Brazil late in the game.
Still no one except Marta can do all those things.
So the announcers are talking about what the player who was the best women's player at the time, and Marta. There she is. Look at that move she just did. So this was a real low point for the U.S. women's team. Everyone expected them to win, and they're losing 4-0 to Brazil. Okay, so let's move on to, this is 2011. Again, the USA meets Brazil in the quarterfinal. Brazil has a 2-1 lead in the final minute of the 30-minute extra period. And this is one of the great moments in U.S. women's soccer history. Looks like they were going to lose to Brazil again. And then this happened.
Rapinoe gets the crossing.
Megan Rapinoe, by the way, is still on the team 8 years later. She just dyed her hair pink. So she's easy to see if you watch the USA games. Okay, I'm going to move on. Okay, this is the 2011 final. So USA won the quarterfinal on penalty kicks, and then they meet Japan. They have a 2-1 lead late in extra time, in the 30-minute extra period. And then disaster struck.
They all play their part, as well as the 21 players. Corner kick for the USA to survive here. Miyama.
Japan went on to win on penalty kicks, and that was their first championship. That's Carly Lloyd. She's the veteran of the team. She's now playing in her 4th World Cup. But let's move forward because time is short. This is 4 years ago in the final against Japan, and boy, did the USA get revenge. You know, sometimes in life, just everything goes right. Well, that was for the USA. This game, everything went right.
Advantage over Japan. Played in short of the ground. Quick shot.
It's the seagull.
Holiday will strike. Sending it low again. The flip from John Stein loose. They let it go. Hanging on again. 2-0 U.S.
So this felt so good after losing 4 years earlier in the final.
Nice ball. U.S. attacking now with numbers in white. Krieger setting in, intended for Morgan. Holiday!
Beautiful volley by Lauren Holiday. This is all, look at this, this is all like the first, 13 minutes?
It's a fantastic
All right, this is one of the greatest goals I think in World Cup history from the half field. Carly Lloyd chipped the goalkeeper from the half field. Okay, now if you win the Women's World Cup, you get a victory parade down in New York. This was, by the way, the first ticker tape parade for a women's team sport 4 years ago. And Mr. T had something positive to say, too. So, I know my time is limited, so I just want to take a minute to talk about this year's tournament. The way the bracket works out, it looks like the USA is going to play France in the quarterfinal. That will be, I think, on Friday, June 28th, assuming that the results prior to that go as we expect them to go. And that's going to be an incredible match. The winner of that game is going to be in the driver's seat to win this Women's World Cup. Personally, I'm actually picking France to win because France is so good, and this year's World Cup is being played in France, so they have the home field advantage. I'm predicting a France-Germany final. And I'm just hoping it goes more like 1945 than 1940. Some of you got that. And finally, I want to talk about the future of women's soccer here in Austin. As I'm sure all of you know, Austin is getting its own team in Major League Soccer. It's going to be called Austin FC. The construction of the new stadium will start in September. Just as of 2 hours ago, Austin FC announced that the season ticket deposit started at 10 a.m. this morning, and Austin set a record for the most season ticket deposits in MLS history in one day. They didn't release the number, but it's probably more like above 12 or 13,000. So the thing is, there's a women's professional soccer league known by the initials NWSL, and some MLS teams have a women's team which plays in the same stadium that the men's team plays in. Here's what I think will happen. If our men's team, Austin FC, is a real success and they sell out every game, I think the team will start a women's league team. Not right away, but maybe there's a very good chance that within 5 years we'll have a women's soccer team here in Austin. Okay, my time is up. Time for Q&A. Thank you.
So, looks like no questions in the Twitterverse, so go right to the audience.
Don't be shy. It's always hardest to ask the first question. There we go.
Yes.
So, sell me on, what's exciting. I'm sure just some moments, say, in a game that went 0 all the way to the end, amazing kick to win the game. Talk about some moments in that game, because a lot of people see that scoreless until the end, right? And just explain why that's not necessarily a bad thing. It could still be an exciting game. And would you say that it's possibly even more exciting if it's close?
Yeah.
How, to paraphrase, tell us a little bit about how the game is exciting even during the long stretches without scoring.
Well, there are 0-0 games which are exciting, and then there's some 0-0 games which are not exciting. It's not the thing about soccer. A common complaint about soccer is that it's a low-scoring sport. People don't like it for that reason. But I think the fact that it's low-scoring is actually a positive, because it means that when a goal comes, there's more excitement and there's more passion, and that's what you watch for. You think about it. If there were 20 goals in a soccer match, each one wouldn't be that exciting. But because there are fewer of them, they're more important and exciting when they happen. So, but if there are few goals, then if you in a low-scoring sport, you do have the potential for a 0-0 game. Here's the interesting thing: I think there's a consensus around the world that the game of soccer would be a little bit better if there was a little more scoring. But there's no consensus on how to change the rules to do that. There's been all kinds of proposals to adjust the offsides rule, to make the goals bigger, all sorts of things like that, and nobody likes any of those ideas. So that's why the rules haven't changed. And, you know, sometimes, I think the prevailing wisdom here is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's the most popular sport in the world, so I think that the scoring is going to remain the way it is. Okay.
Okay. Another question. Yes, in the back.
Do you have a dark horse in the current...
I do.
Do you have a dark horse in the current?
I said USA, England, Germany, France are going to probably almost certainly going to win. Australia has an outside chance. Australia's been playing pretty well lately. Australia scored 3 goals against the United States earlier this year. The Netherlands has a really good team. The Netherlands is a country which always produced great men's players. They're finally producing some good female players because they started putting money into it. Sweden and Norway have a shot, but I'm going to pick one dark horse. I guess I'll go with Australia.
Another question? Yes.
Funny you should ask.
World Cup in person?
I have not. I've always watched on TV. You know, here's the thing. Going to a game is great and I enjoy it, but you can see the game just as well on TV. In fact, sometimes you can see the game better on TV. So, no, I am not.
Okay, we're running long, so one more question.
I think we went right here.
Yes.
Oh.
Did you buy a ticket this morning?
Did you buy a ticket this morning?
I did. I put my deposit down. You know, I was on the website at 9:30, and then at 10 a.m. when they took deposits, the site crashed. But somebody sent me a link on Twitter to the place where you can put deposit. At like 10:10, I got my deposit in. So I think I should have pretty good seats.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.